I never thought I'd end up in a full-blown war with my own homeowners association, but here we are. It all started when I bought a quiet little house in a suburban neighborhood, a place that promised peace, privacy, and a friendly community. Turns out, that community was ruled by one person, Karen. You know the type. Always walking around with a clipboard, acting like she's the mayor of the street. From the moment I moved in, she made it her mission to remind everyone that she was the head of the HOA, and what she said was law. At first, I really did try to be nice. I didn't move into this neighborhood to make enemies. I just wanted peace and a fresh start. So when I met her, I tried to keep an open mind. You know, I'd heard stories about HOAs being strict, but I figured it couldn't be that bad. So there I was, standing on my front porch, boxes still piled high inside my house, when she came marching down the sidewalk like she was on an inspection tour. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on. That I'm in charge here kind of posture. She had this fake smile plastered across her face, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, thrusting a folder into my hands before I could even introduce myself. "I'm Karen. I'm the president of our HOA. We like to keep things nice and orderly around here." I smiled politely and thanked her, thinking she was just being helpful. She stood there for a few minutes, giving me the rundown of what she called community expectations. I nodded along, not wanting to seem rude, but something about her tone rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't welcoming. It was commanding. Like she wasn't telling me the rules. She was reminding me who made them. Later that evening, after I finally got my furniture set up and made myself some coffee, I sat down and flipped through that packet. At first glance, it looked professional. Logos, bullet points, everything. But the more I read, the more ridiculous it became. It was like someone had taken a normal rulebook and sprinkled in their own personal pet peeves. There were rules about everything. And I mean everything. Your front door could only be painted one of 3 approved shades, all some variation of beige. Grass couldn't grow taller than exactly 2.5 inches. You weren't allowed to park pickup trucks or non-luxury vehicles in your driveway overnight. I'm not kidding. It literally said non-luxury. I thought, who even writes stuff like this? But then it got worse. The list actually included a rule about acceptable decorative styles. Apparently, garden gnomes were considered visual clutter, and any kind of seasonal decoration had to be taken down within 48 hours of a holiday. And here's the kicker. There was even a clause about number of guests per household event. According to that, I could only have 4 visitors at a time unless I filed a temporary event permission form. I sat there on my couch, laughing in disbelief. It was so over the top that I almost thought it was a joke. But deep down, I had this uneasy feeling. Something told me that this wasn't just paper. This was Karen's law. Still, I tried to brush it off. I told myself, okay, maybe she's just organized. Maybe she wants to keep the place looking nice. No harm in that, right? Wrong. Within the first week, I started getting these little reminders from her. The first one showed up in my mailbox, a neatly typed note that said, "Your trash cans must be brought in within 20 minutes of pickup. Please be mindful of our community standards." 20 minutes. I mean, seriously? What if I wasn't home that morning? What if I had work? It felt ridiculous. But I thought, okay, maybe she's just particular. Then came the second note. This one said, "Your mailbox paint appears slightly dull. Please consider repainting to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood." At that point, I actually walked outside and stared at my mailbox. It looked fine. Not shiny, not faded, just normal. I started to realize this wasn't about keeping things tidy. This was about control. She wanted everyone to play by her rules. Rules she clearly made up as she went along. But the real breaking point came when I decided to hang up some string lights for my niece's birthday. It wasn't anything crazy, just some soft white lights across the porch railings. We were planning a small, family-only evening with cake, presents, and a little music. About 20 minutes after I finished setting them up, I heard the sound of footsteps on my driveway. I looked up, and there she was again, clipboard in hand, storming toward my porch like a code enforcement officer on a mission. Without even greeting me, she squinted up at the lights and said, Those are not HOA-approved fixtures." I blinked. "They're just lights," I said, laughing nervously. "They'll be down after the party tomorrow." But she didn't even acknowledge that. She reached into her bag, pulled out a measuring tape, and started measuring the height of the lights. I just stood there, stunned. "You're exceeding the permitted decorative boundary," she said, as if she were issuing a parking ticket. "And lights must be of uniform color temperature to maintain consistency across homes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Color temperature? You mean the color of the light?" "Yes," she replied firmly, jotting something down on her clipboard. "Yours are too warm. The community standard is cool white." I swear, I almost laughed at her face. I said, "Karen, these are for a kid's birthday party. They're coming down tomorrow. Can we please not make a big deal out of this?" But she wasn't having it. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "Rules are rules. We have to keep order, or the whole neighborhood will fall apart." Then she turned and walked off like she had just restored justice. The next day, I got another letter, this one marked HOA violation notice. It said I was being fined for unauthorized decorative installations. The fine, $50, over string lights that were already gone. That was the moment I realized something. Karen didn't just enjoy enforcing rules, she lived for it. She got satisfaction from catching people slipping up. It wasn't about the neighborhood's beauty or property value. It was about power. The kind of power that comes from controlling others, one petty infraction at a time. From that point on, it felt like she was watching me. Every time I left my house, I'd see her walking her little dog past my yard, glancing over like she was checking for violations. If I parked my car slightly off-center in the driveway, boom, another note. If I had a package left on my porch for more than a few hours, another reminder about community tidiness. It was like living under surveillance. And it wasn't just me. Other neighbors whispered about her too. She'd find one guy for having a basketball hoop in his driveway, and another woman for hanging a wind chime that was too loud. Still, I kept my cool. I figured if I stayed quiet, she'd get bored and move on to someone else. But of course, Karen wasn't the kind of person to let things go. No matter how small the issue, she found a way to twist it into a violation. It was like she had made it her personal mission to remind everyone that she ran this neighborhood. Not the homeowners, not the community, but her. And little did I know this was just the beginning. Because soon, her obsession with control would go way beyond trash cans and porch lights. She'd set her sights on something much bigger, something that didn't belong to her at all. My land. Next to my house, there was this quiet, open piece of land, about half an acre of uneven grass, a few oak trees, and some scattered wildflowers that came to life every spring. It wasn't exactly prime real estate, but to me, it was perfect. It gave me a sense of space, a little pocket of peace between my home and the rest of the neighborhood. When I bought the property, the realtor had mentioned that it was part of the parcel deal. "You've got the house, the driveway, and this extra lot," she had said, flipping through the paperwork. "Technically, it's one property." That extra stretch of land was one of the biggest reasons I decided to buy the place. I like having the freedom to do what I wanted with it. Maybe someday, I'd build a workshop, or a gazebo, or even a little guest house. For now, it was just a simple patch of green, but it was mine. For months, that's how things stayed, quiet and undisturbed. The birds used the trees as their playground, and sometimes my dog would chase squirrels through the tall grass. I'd mow it every few weeks, just to keep it looking neat. Nobody ever said a word about it, until she did. One sunny afternoon, I was in my kitchen making coffee when I saw movement outside my window. I looked out and noticed a group of people standing on the empty lot. At first, I thought maybe a utility company had sent workers out to check something, but then I recognized one of the figures in the middle, clipboard in hand, wide-brimmed hat, and that unmistakable I'm in charge stance. Karen. She was pacing across my lot like she owned the place, pointing at different spots in the ground while talking to a couple of landscapers. They were holding rolled-up blueprints and measuring tapes, looking around like they were about to start digging. I frowned, confused. I hadn't scheduled any work, and nobody had asked for permission to be there. So, I grabbed my keys and walked outside to see what was going on. As I got closer, I could hear snippets of her conversation. "And we'll put the raised beds along this line here," she said, gesturing with her pen. "The benches can go under those trees. That'll give it a nice, shaded area." I stepped onto the grass and called out, "Hey, excuse me. What's happening here?" Karen turned around, completely unfazed by my tone. She smiled that same condescending smile she always did, the one that made it seem like she was talking to a child who didn't understand the rules. "Oh, don't worry," she said, waving a hand like this was no big deal. "We're putting in a community garden here. It's going to be wonderful. Fresh vegetables, flowers, maybe even a little path through the middle. It'll really increase the neighborhood's charm." I blinked, certain I'd misheard her. "A community garden?" I repeated. "On this land?" She nodded cheerfully. "Yes, it's part of our HOA improvement plan. We got a grant from the community fund, and we've already scheduled the landscapers. Isn't that exciting?" I could feel my blood pressure rising. "Karen," I said carefully, "this isn't community property. This land is mine. It came with my house." Her smile faltered for half a second before she gave this little chuckle, the kind people use when they think you're being naive. "Oh no, sweetie," she said, tilting her head. "That's HOA land. It's always been that way. It's part of our open green space." I took a slow breath. "No," I said firmly. "It's not. It's on my deed. I pay taxes on it. You can't just build something here without my permission." Karen's expression hardened. "Well, we've always used this land as part of the community," she said. "The HOA's been maintaining it for years. If you look at our maps, you'll see it's designated as communal property." I stared at her in disbelief. "Maintaining it? Karen, I'm the one who mows it. The HOA has never done anything on this lot. Not once." The landscapers stood there awkwardly, glancing between us like they'd just realized they'd stepped into a minefield. One of them whispered something to the other and quietly started rolling up his measuring tape. But Karen wasn't backing down. She crossed her arms and said, "You really should have checked the HOA bylaws before assuming, dear. We've been planning this project for months. The whole neighborhood is excited." I could feel anger bubbling up in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Karen, I don't care what the HOA plans. This land is private property. Mine. And if you or anyone else steps on it again without my permission, I'll have to call the police for trespassing." For a moment, her face froze, that fake smile slipping into something sharper, colder. "There's no need to be dramatic," she said finally. "We're just trying to make the community better. Don't you want to be part of something beautiful?" "Not if it means you're stealing my land," I shot back. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and then she let out a small laugh. "Fine," she said. "I'll look into it. But I think you'll find that you're mistaken." With that, she turned to the landscapers and said, "Let's pack up for today. We'll revisit once the paperwork is sorted." They left. She followed them down the street, scribbling something onto her clipboard before disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a while, just staring at the patch of grass where she'd been planting her community garden. My heart was pounding. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd heard about power-hungry HOA presidents before, but I never imagined one would have the nerve to literally try to claim my land. That night, I pulled out every document I had from when I bought the property. The purchase agreement, the deed, the property line survey, everything. And sure enough, the lot next to my house was listed, clear as day, as part of my property. The boundaries matched exactly where I'd seen her standing that afternoon. It was 100% mine. No question about it. The next morning, I printed copies of everything and went straight to Karen's house. I figured we could clear this up quickly and avoid unnecessary drama. When she opened the door, she gave me that same tight smile, like she'd been expecting me. I handed her the paperwork and said, "Here. You can see for yourself. The land is mine. Please don't schedule anything there again." She glanced over the papers briefly, then shrugged. "Well, I'll have to verify this with the HOA's records," she said, in that syrupy voice that barely hid her irritation. "We'll see what the board says." I tried to reason with her. "Karen, these are legal documents. They override whatever the HOA thinks its records say. But she just smiled and said, "We'll let the board decide." That's when I realized this wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She knew. She just didn't care. She wanted that land, and she was going to do whatever it took to claim it. I walked away from her porch that day knowing things were about to get ugly. Because when someone like Karen thinks she owns something, facts and deeds don't matter, control does. And she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. The moment Karen walked away with that smug little smile, I knew I couldn't just take her word for anything. So as soon as I got back inside, I went straight to my filing cabinet and pulled out every single piece of paper from my home purchase. The deed, the title report, the property survey, even the tax assessment documents. I spread them all out across my kitchen table like I was assembling evidence for a courtroom drama. I spent hours cross-referencing every page. I wasn't going to give her or the HOA an inch of doubt. There it was, in black and white, my name, my signature, and a legal description of the property boundaries that included the half-acre lot right next to my house. There was no confusion, no loophole, no fine print. It was mine. I double-checked the parcel number online through the county's property records. Same number, same address, same boundary lines. The property tax bill? Yep, all addressed to me. I'd been paying for that piece of land since day one. The more I looked, the angrier I got. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was the sheer arrogance, the idea that Karen thought she could just declare something hers because she wanted it. The next morning, I printed copies of everything and put them neatly into a folder. I figured that once she saw the proof, this whole situation would be over. Surely even Karen couldn't argue with official county records, right? Oh, how wrong I was. I marched over to her house, knocked on the door, and waited. After a few seconds, I heard the sound of heels clicking on the tile floor before she opened the door, wearing that same practiced smile. "Morning, Karen," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. I just wanted to clear up the confusion about that empty lot. I checked all my documents. The lot is legally part of my property. I brought copies of everything, so you can see for yourself. She took the folder with a slow, almost exaggerated motion, as if I just handed her a grocery coupon. She flipped through the papers for all of 5 seconds, didn't even read them, then looked up at me with that syrupy tone she always used when she was about to say something infuriating. "Well, that's interesting," she said, with a tiny smirk. "But according to our HOA plans, that land is designated for community use. It's part of a proposed rezoning initiative. We've been discussing it for a while now." I blinked, stunned. "Rezoning initiative? What are you talking about?" "Oh, it's all very normal," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "The HOA board can file to rezone in used spaces to improve the neighborhood. It's in the bylaws." I stared at her, speechless for a moment. "You can't rezone private property, Karen. That's not how it works." She shrugged, her voice dripping with condescension. "We'll see. The board has final say on community development. If the lot benefits everyone, I'm sure the city will approve." That's when it hit me. She genuinely believed she could take my property just because she wanted to. I took a step closer, my tone sharper now. "Listen carefully. That land is mine. It's on my deed. I pay taxes on it. If you or anyone from the HOA steps on it again, I'll treat it as trespassing." Her smile faltered just a bit, but she quickly recovered. "No need to get hostile," she said sweetly. "We're just trying to make our neighborhood a better place. But if you want to make this difficult, that's your choice." I couldn't believe it. She was acting like I was the problem. I turned and walked away, fuming. I'd shown her legal proof, and she still acted like the HOA had the power to rezone my property. The sheer audacity was mind-boggling. For a few days, I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe she'd back down after realizing she had no legal ground to stand on. But then, about a week later, I got a letter in the mail, a thick, official-looking envelope with the HOA's logo stamped on the front. When I opened it, my jaw dropped. The letter was written in the most self-important, bureaucratic tone imaginable. It said, "Dear homeowner, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association that you are currently obstructing a scheduled community improvement project on HOA property. We request that you cease all interference immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and potential forfeiture of HOA privileges. I read that paragraph 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They were literally threatening to fine me for protecting my own property. Attached to the letter was a notice of violation form, listing my offense as unauthorized interference with HOA development. It even said they planned to levy a $200 fine if I didn't remove all barriers preventing community access to the land. Barriers? The only thing I had done was exist. I hadn't put up a fence, hadn't posted signs, nothing. The barrier was apparently me saying no. At first, I laughed out loud. It was so absurd that it felt like a prank. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to bother me. Because I knew how HOAs worked. Once they start sending letters, they don't stop. They love paperwork. They love threats. And most of all, they love intimidation. I called the number listed on the letter to speak with someone from the HOA office. A woman answered, clearly reading from a script. "Thank you for calling the Cedar Creek Homeowners Association," she said. "How may I help you?" "Yes," I said, trying to stay calm. "I received a violation notice claiming I'm obstructing a community project. But the project in question is on my privately owned property. I have the deed right here." There was a pause on the line, followed by a polite but robotic reply. "If you have documentation proving ownership, you may submit it for review by the HOA board. They meet on the first Tuesday of next month." Next month. They expected me to wait weeks while they reviewed something that wasn't even in their jurisdiction. "I'm not submitting anything," I said firmly. "You have no authority over my land. If anyone steps on it again, I'll file a trespassing complaint." Another pause. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but all community property issues must go through the board." "It's not community property," I snapped. "It's mine." The line went quiet, and then she said, in a tone that was both dismissive and rehearsed, "You'll need to take that up with the HOA president." "Of course, Karen." I hung up and sat there at my kitchen table, holding the letter in my hand, feeling a mix of disbelief and fury. They were really going to play this game. They were really going to pretend they could bully me into giving up my own land. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't the kind of person who folded under pressure. I'd dealt with bureaucrats before, and if Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one, the legal kind. I spent the next 2 days gathering every scrap of proof I could find. I made copies, printed aerial maps from the county website, highlighted the property lines, and even got in touch with the county recorder's office to verify the records in person. The clerk there confirmed everything. The HOA had absolutely no claim to that land. Armed with all that evidence, I prepared for war, because clearly, that's what this was turning into. Karen and her HOA cronies wanted to make me look like a troublemaker, someone standing in the way of community progress. But the truth was, they were just trying to strong-arm me into surrendering what was rightfully mine. And if they thought I'd roll over, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. That's when it finally hit me. Karen wasn't just some nosy neighbor with too much free time. She wasn't just a control freak obsessed with rules. No, this was something deeper. She was actively trying to take my property. And that realization lit a fire in me. At first, I was angry. Then I was determined. Because if there's one thing I can't stand, it's someone thinking they can push me around and get away with it. Karen might have bullied the rest of the neighborhood into following her ridiculous HOA rules, but I wasn't one of her puppets. So, I decided it was time to fight back, legally and intelligently. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney. His name was Mark Benson, calm, sharp, and professional, with the kind of quiet confidence that told me he'd seen every kind of property dispute imaginable. When I explained what was happening, he didn't even sound surprised. He said, "Let me guess. HOA president trying to reinterpret the property lines?" "Exactly," I said, exasperated. "She's claiming my land belongs to the community. She's even talking about rezoning it." He chuckled softly. "You'd be shocked how often this happens. People like that think HOAs give them the power of God. Don't worry. If your deed says it's yours, it's yours. We'll make that very clear to them." Those words were the first bit of relief I'd felt in weeks. Over the next few days, Mark and I compiled every single piece of documentation we could find. He asked for scanned copies of the deed, the parcel map, the original survey, and even the tax payment history. He went through each one meticulously, highlighting the sections that proved ownership beyond question. I remember sitting in his office, watching him mark up the documents with a red pen. "You've got a solid case," he said. "Legally, they have zero claim. But people like this don't care about facts. They care about control. So, we're going to make it impossible for them to pretend otherwise." His first suggestion was to send a cease and desist letter, a formal warning telling the HOA to stop all interference and trespassing immediately. It was a good idea, and it would create a paper trail proving that I'd given them fair notice. But as much as I respected his legal approach, I had my own idea. Because I knew someone like Karen. She thrived on appearances, on control, on being the loudest voice in the room. And if I wanted her to back off, I needed to hit her where it hurt most, her ego. "If they want to play dirty," I told Mark, "I'll play smarter." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" I smiled. "Visibility." That weekend, I hired a local fencing company. The workers showed up early Saturday morning with wooden posts, metal stakes, and rolls of sturdy wire fencing. As they started unloading the equipment, I could already feel the tension building in the air. It was only a matter of time before she noticed. And sure enough, not 20 minutes later, I saw her. Karen came striding down the sidewalk in her usual "I run this place" walk, wearing her wide-brimmed sun hat and holding, of course, her ever-present clipboard. The second she spotted the crew working on my lot, her expression twisted like she'd just bitten into a lemon. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Excuse me," she shouted from across the street, storming toward us. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned to her, calm as could be. "Putting up a fence," I said simply. Her jaw tightened. "A fence? You can't just build structures without HOA approval." I held up my phone, which already had the county's property map pulled up. "This is private property, Karen. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here." She blinked, clearly not expecting me to be so prepared. "That's not true," she snapped. "All visible modifications have to be reviewed. That's in the bylaws." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "For HOA property. But this isn't that. I can build a fence, a shed, or a castle here if I want." The fencing crew looked like they were trying not to laugh. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she might explode. "This ruins the aesthetic of the neighborhood," she yelled. "You're ruining the view for everyone." I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she felt every word. "You mean the neighborhood I legally own part of?" Her eyes widened slightly, but before she could fire back, I turned away and said to the workers, "Keep going, guys." For the rest of the day, she lingered nearby, pacing back and forth with her arms crossed, muttering under her breath, and taking pictures with her phone. It was honestly kind of funny. She looked like a park ranger trying to document a crime scene. By the evening, the fence was done, a clean, sturdy border that clearly marked the edges of my property. I didn't stop there, though. I had the workers install 2 heavy-duty, private property, "No trespassing" signs on either side. And right in the center, I added one more sign, bold black letters on a white background. "Violators will be prosecuted." It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. When I stepped back to look at the finished result, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in months, I felt like I had my peace of mind back. My property was secure, the boundaries were visible, and there was no way Karen could pretend she didn't understand where the lines were anymore, literally and figuratively. Of course, the peace didn't last long. The next morning, I looked out my window and saw her standing by the fence again, hands on her hips, talking to 2 other HOA board members. They looked uncomfortable. You could tell they didn't want to be there. Karen, however, was in full command mode, waving her clipboard and pointing aggressively at the fence like it was a national emergency. After a few minutes, she marched straight up to my door and rang the bell repeatedly until I answered. "Good morning," I said flatly. "This is unacceptable," she barked. That fence violates community guidelines. You need to take it down immediately." I crossed my arms. Guidelines don't apply to private property. And before you even say it, yes, I already confirmed it with the county. You have no authority here. Her nostrils flared. "We'll see about that." Then she turned and stomped away, muttering something under her breath about calling a board meeting. I watched her go, shaking my head. There she was again, trying to turn my personal boundary line into some kind of power struggle. But what she didn't realize was that the more she fought me, the worse she was making herself look. That fence became a symbol, not just to me, but to the whole neighborhood. People started noticing what was going on. A few neighbors even came by quietly to say things like, "Good for you," or "About time someone stood up to her." It turned out I wasn't the only one she'd been pushing around, and every time Karen walked by that fence, I could see it in her face, that burning frustration of someone who'd finally met a wall they couldn't climb. Literally, I didn't need to shout, threaten, or argue. The message was clear enough: this is mine. You can't have it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine: budget reports, landscaping updates, the usual small talk, but everyone in the neighborhood could sense something big was coming. Word had already spread that I was planning to show up with a lawyer. Karen had been whispering to people for days, trying to control the narrative before I could even speak. She went door to door like a politician on the campaign trail, telling anyone who'd listened that I was refusing to cooperate with community efforts and causing unnecessary drama over property that wasn't really mine. It was classic Karen: spin the story before the truth had a chance to surface. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't coming in empty-handed. My lawyer, Mark, had assembled a folder thicker than a phone book, filled with every official record, county map, tax statement, and legal document proving that the land in question was 100% mine. No gray area, no loopholes, no wiggle room. By the time we arrived at the meeting, the room was already packed. The HOA usually met in a small community center room: beige walls, folding chairs, a cheap plastic table at the front with a HOA board sign taped to it. But that night, almost every seat was filled. Some people even stood along the back wall, arms crossed, waiting for the show. Karen was already there, sitting at the head of the table, wearing her signature blazer and pearls, the picture of self-importance. She greeted people with a practiced smile, pretending everything was normal. When she saw me walking with Mark by my side, that smile cracked, just a tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth, but I saw it. She knew she was in trouble. "Ah, Mr. Private Property," she said loudly, using that fake laugh she always used when she was trying to humiliate someone publicly. "So nice of you to join us. I trust you've come to cooperate this time." I didn't take the bait. I just smiled politely and said, "I'm here to clear up some misinformation." Mark and I took seats near the front. The room went quiet as the meeting began. Karen started with the usual agenda items, pretending everything was business as usual: neighborhood beautification, parking complaints, upcoming community events. She was clearly stalling, trying to put off the confrontation as long as possible. But it didn't take long before someone in the back spoke up. "Karen, what's going on with that empty lot next to his house?" a man asked, gesturing toward me. "I heard the HOA was trying to build a garden there." Her smile tightened. "Yes," she said. "That land has always been part of the HOA's community property. Unfortunately, some homeowners have misunderstood the situation." That was my cue. I stood up, holding the folder in my hands. "Actually," I said calmly, "there's no misunderstanding. That land is private property, mine, and I have the legal proof to show it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Please, let's not turn this into a spectacle," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've reviewed our maps, and they clearly show." "Actually," my lawyer interrupted, standing beside me, "your maps are wrong." You could feel the tension snap in the room, like a rubber band. Mark opened the folder and laid out several large, printed documents on the table: official county property records with seal stamps, parcel boundary maps, and even copies of the HOA's own bylaws that explicitly limited their jurisdiction to community-owned land. He pointed to one section after another, explaining in a calm, professional tone. According to the county assessor's office, this parcel, lot number 17B, has been privately owned since 1998. It was never transferred to the HOA. The taxes for this lot have been paid by my client consistently for the past 3 years. Here's the proof. He slid the papers across the table toward Karen. She hesitated, staring at them like they were radioactive. Then, without even reading them, she tried to brush it off. Well, that may be what your papers say, but our records. Mark didn't even let her finish. Your records are inaccurate, he said firmly, and continuing to claim ownership of this property or attempting to use it for HOA projects constitutes trespassing and potential fraud. The word fraud hung in the air like a thunderclap. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a soft-spoken man named Tom, finally spoke up. Wait, are you saying the HOA doesn't own that land? Mark nodded. Correct. And yet, your president has been claiming it as community property and attempting to develop it without the owner's consent. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face flushed red. That's ridiculous, she snapped. We've always maintained that land as part of the HOA. Really? I said, crossing my arms. Because I've been mowing it myself since I moved in. The HOA hasn't spent a single dime maintaining it, unless you're counting the money you've been collecting from other homeowners for lot maintenance. That hit like a bomb. Several people turned their heads sharply toward Karen. Wait, what? Someone asked. You've been collecting fees for that? Karen stammered. Well, yes, but only a small amount. It's part of the general upkeep fund. No, Mark cut in smoothly. That's misrepresentation. Charging residents for property maintenance on land the HOA doesn't own is unlawful. I'd advise everyone here to check their fee statements. Now the room was buzzing. Neighbors were pulling out their phones, scrolling through their HOA payment records, whispering to each other. One woman near the front said, I paid for that lot's upkeep last year. There's even a line item for it, community green space. Another man muttered, I've been paying that for years. Karen's composure cracked. She slammed her hand on the table. This is getting blown out of proportion, she snapped. It was a misunderstanding. We thought. You thought wrong, I said. And you've been taking people's money under false pretenses. That was it. The floodgates opened. People started shouting questions, demanding answers. Where's all that money been going? Who approved these charges? How many other things has she lied about? Karen tried to talk over them, raising her voice, but it was no use. The room had turned against her. For the first time, the power she'd held over everyone, through fear, fines, and intimidation, was slipping away. One of the other board members, clearly fed up, stood up and said, I think we need to suspend the president's authority until we can verify all financial activity. This doesn't look good. That sent Karen over the edge. You can't do that, she shouted. I'm the elected president. You all voted for me. Yeah, someone from the back yelled. And we can unvote you too. That got a few laughs, but Karen didn't find it funny. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, muttering under her breath about ungrateful neighbors and legal overreactions. Then she stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the HOA board sign fell off the table. For a long moment, the room was completely silent. Then someone started clapping, and before I knew it, the whole room joined in a slow, steady applause that grew louder until the sound filled every corner. Mark looked at me and smiled. I think that went well, he said dryly. That night, word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People started sharing stories about all the ridiculous fines, warnings, and fees Karen had slapped them with over the years. The more people compared notes, the clearer it became. Karen had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom, using it to squeeze money and power out of her neighbors. By the end of the week, several homeowners had filed official complaints demanding refunds for the maintenance fees she'd collected for that lot and other projects that never existed. A petition started circulating to remove her as HOA president entirely. For once, the neighborhood wasn't afraid of her anymore. They were angry and united. And as for me, I didn't have to lift another finger. The truth had done all the work for me. You'd think that would be the end of it. The truth exposed, the HOA humbled, and Karen finally out of my hair. But oh no, the universe wasn't done yet. It's funny how life works sometimes. You can spend months fighting a battle, think it's finally over, and then, out of nowhere, karma decides to throw you a little encore performance. A few months after the infamous HOA meeting, things had quieted down in the neighborhood. Karen had been officially removed as president after an internal audit uncovered financial inconsistencies, which was just a polite way of saying she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. After that, she pretty much disappeared from community life. No more daily patrols with her clipboard, no more threatening letters, no more surprise inspections. For the first time since moving there, I could actually enjoy my morning coffee without feeling like I was being watched from behind a pair of binoculars. The HOA had new leadership now, normal, decent people who actually cared about keeping the neighborhood nice instead of using it as their personal fiefdom. The atmosphere changed completely. People started chatting again, helping each other out, even organizing little barbecues and block parties. It finally felt like a community. And just when I thought life had settled down for good, I got the message. It came through a mutual acquaintance, a neighbor named Steve, who knew just about everyone in the area. He stopped by one afternoon while I was out front trimming the hedges. "Hey," he said, grinning awkwardly, "you're not going to believe who asked me for your number." I laughed. "That sounds like trouble already." "Who?" He hesitated for a moment, like he wasn't sure how to say it. "Then Karen." I nearly dropped the hedge trimmer. "You're kidding." "Nope," he said, holding up his hands. "Apparently her daughter just got a new job nearby and needs a short-term place to stay. She heard you've got that little guest house behind your main place, the one you fixed up last spring." I stared at him in disbelief. "She wants to rent from me? After everything she pulled?" Steve chuckled. "Yeah, I told her that was going to be an awkward conversation." Awkward was an understatement. A few hours later, I got the message myself, a very formal, overly polite email from none other than Karen. Gone was her usual condescending tone. No more per HOA guidelines or failure to comply. Instead, it was full of phrases like, "If it's not too much trouble," and "I completely understand if you're not comfortable." She explained that her daughter, Emily, had been offered a job in town and needed a temporary rental for 6 months while she got settled. The area had limited short-term housing options, and apparently, my little guest house, the same one Karen once complained didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic, was now her daughter's best bet. I read that email 3 times just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The irony was just too delicious. For a brief moment, I thought about saying no. I mean, who could blame me? This was the same woman who tried to take my land, fine me into submission, and accuse me of being a problem homeowner. But then I realized there was something far more satisfying than rejection. So I replied politely, "I'll think about it." The next day, I sent a follow-up. I told her that after some consideration, I'd be willing to rent out the guest house, but only under a few strict conditions. Condition number 1, full market rent. No discounts, no favors, no neighborly deals. Condition number 2, a proper, written lease, 12 pages long, legally airtight, reviewed by my lawyer, the same one who'd taken her apart at the HOA meeting. Condition number 3, every rule clearly outlined, quiet hours, parking restrictions, even garbage pickup times. And my favorite, condition number 4, any HOA disputes concerning the property are to be handled directly through me, the legal owner. In other words, Karen had to acknowledge, in writing, that this was my property, not the HOA's, not community land, but mine. She hesitated for a bit, but the rental market around here was tight, and her daughter needed a place fast. A week later, she agreed, and that's how, on a sunny Friday afternoon, Karen herself came to my door, holding a pen in her trembling hand, ready to sign a lease on my property. I'll never forget that moment. I watched her scan the document, her lips pressed tightly together as she read each line. Every clause, every rule, every reminder that she had to respect the property boundaries. It was all there in black and white. She tried to maintain her usual fake composure, but I could tell it was eating her alive. When she finally reached the signature page, she paused, sighed dramatically, and said, "You really went all out with this, didn't you?" I smiled. "Hey, I just like to make sure everything's done by the book. You, of all people, should appreciate that." She didn't reply, just signed her name and handed the papers back with a stiff smile. And that's when it hit me, the sheer poetry of it all. The same woman who once stood in my yard screaming about HOA jurisdiction was now legally bound to pay me rent every single month. And she did. Like clockwork, on the first of every month, I'd get a little digital notification from my bank. New payment received. Rent from K. Thompson. Every time I saw it, I couldn't help but smile. At first, I thought she might try to make things difficult. Maybe complain about the appliances or nitpick the tiniest details out of spite. But she didn't. In fact, she avoided me completely. She'd drop off rent checks quietly or send them online, never setting foot near my main house. The few times we did cross paths, usually when she was helping her daughter move boxes or water the plants, she couldn't even make eye contact. Gone was the smug tone, the constant lecturing, the power trip. She was polite, quiet, even deferential. I guess it's hard to feel superior when you're paying rent to the guy you once tried to bully. A few neighbors found out, of course. Word always gets around. And when they did, the reactions were priceless. Some people laughed for days. One guy told me, "That's karma with a lease agreement." I couldn't have said it better myself. Eventually, her daughter moved out after her lease ended, and life went back to normal. But every time I walk past that guest house, I can't help but think about how perfectly the universe tied that story up. Karen had spent years trying to control every square inch of the neighborhood, and in the end, she ended up paying me for the privilege of living on the very land she once tried to steal. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with flashing lights or dramatic courtroom scenes. Sometimes, it shows up in the form of a signed lease and a monthly rent payment. And if you ask me, that's the best kind of revenge. Now, Karen keeps her distance. The HOA has a new president, one who actually follows the law and treats neighbors like people, not subjects. As for me, I've learned that standing up for your rights doesn't always mean yelling or fighting. It means knowing the facts, using the system, and staying calm when others lose it. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting, "I told you so." It's watching the person who tried to take what's yours hand you a rent check every month.